I've had the iPad Pro for about 3 to 4 weeks now, and I've been using it extensively, but is the iPad Pro overkill now? Hello everyone, my name's Mike, and here at Tech Commune I uncover Apple tech and Apple related tech, so hit that subscribe button if that's what you're into. So to give you a bit of background on my uses, I use all kinds of Macs in my daily workflow, from productivity stuff like Word stuff to video editing and motion graphics, and I actually daily drive an M1 MacBook because it's great battery life and fast processor. So when Apple announced the new iPad Pro with the M1 processor, I just had to get it, and that's because I wanted to know if it's actually any good, and I wanted to talk about it in a way that not many reviewers are talking about it in. So the iPad Pro that I went for is the base model iPad Pro 12.9 inch with the 128GB of memory and 8GB of unified memory. So my focus of this review will be based on this model. The design is the same as last year's model, except that it's a little bit thicker and a little bit heavier. It feels great in the hand, but the 12.9 inch display is a little bit large for consistent handheld use. And when you try to hold it with just one hand to use the iPad with your other hand, it just starts to become a little bit uncomfortable. Now, the reason I went for this model is to try out that Liquid Retina XDR display, and the display is fantastic. I've watched a lot of HDR content on this and it is really good. It is the best experience I've had on an Apple device, except for, I would say, the iPhones. It's hard to show you on video, but trust me, if you watch a lot of movies and content on your iPad, there is no better experience than this. With 1000 nits of brightness and with 1600 nits of peak brightness, the bright spots in videos are really bright without the shadows being washed out. This is because there are 10,000 mini LEDs that allows for 2,596 local dimming zones on the screen, which means that you get a contrast ratio of 1,000,000:1. In the real world, when you are watching a movie, rather than the black bars looking a little bit grey, the black bars look completely black because the LEDs that are in that area are turned off. Now, you do see a slight white halo around white words on a black background, but honestly it is hardly noticeable. I did do a separate video explaining this, so watch that after this, but basically in most situations you're not going to notice this halo, and in my opinion it's worth the trade-off because the watching movie experience is just so much better, and in my opinion it's just not an issue. I would rather take this display over an LCD any day. Just to let you know that 1000 nits of brightness isn't available when you're watching non-HDR content, nor is it available in everyday use with the iPad. You are actually locked to the old 600 nits, but honestly that's not a bad thing because 600 nits is plenty. Here is a comparison between the LCD display on the MacBook and then the mini LED on the iPad Pro. As you can see, the blacks are just truly black, which makes a huge difference. Honestly, this screen truly does give OLED-like blacks, and I really want to see this come to the MacBooks. ProMotion allows the display to go up to 120Hz, so everything just feels more fluid, and the clarity when scrolling is just better. But I don't find this as useful as I would find it on a phone because I don't find myself scrolling as much on the iPad. The other advantage of going for the ProMotion display is the perfect multiples of both 24 and 30 frames. This means that both 24 and 30 frames per second content can be scaled perfectly to match the native refresh rate of the display. No longer will the device have to perform a 3 to 2 pull down, which can cause juddering during motion while watching 24 frames per second film content on a 60Hz display. Speaking of the movie watching experience, the iPad Pro has 4 awesome speakers. I was really surprised at how good they were. Here is a little test comparing them to the M1 MacBook Air. As you can hear, the iPad Pro speakers are really clear and much louder. The rear cameras are really good too if you need to take some photos of documents and stuff like that, but realistically you aren't going to be using it for much more. For my uses, I didn't see any need for the LiDAR sensors, and this doesn't film in Dolby Vision like the iPhone 12 Pro does, which seems like a bit of a missed opportunity because imagine being able to film and edit in just one machine. A feature that I thought I would find useful because I use FaceTime quite a lot is center stage, but it has its issues. Center Stage only works with apps that take advantage of the API, but most apps are currently working quite quickly on this. Zoom, for example, has already pushed out an update for it. It doesn't work with the phone or video modes, by the way, and again, I did do a separate video comparing the cameras of all the M1 Max and stuff like that compared to the iPad, so check that out for more details. Unlocking the iPad was really easy thanks to its Face ID sensors, but when you hold it in landscape, you kind of block the sensors. It does get a little bit annoying, but I thought it was just worth mentioning, as you can see. So let's get into performance and then my issues with the M1 iPad Pro, and honestly it's worth sticking around because I speak a little bit of truth on this. So as you may know, this is rocking the M1 chip, and you can either choose 8GB or 16GB of unified memory, but it's all linked to storage. If you buy the 128, 256 or 512GB option, you get the 8GB of unified memory, but if you go for the 1TB or 2TB SSD option, you'll get the 16GB of unified memory, which could run you between $1,800 to $2,000. That's a lot of money for an iPad, right? Anyway, apps open up super fast, and using Affinity Photo and Designer on the iPad was great, and even the LumaFusion worked really well. Despite it lacking some of the pro features I look for in a video editing program, it was fast and it was really snappy. Definitely worth the $25 I think it is for the program. Using the Apple Pencil, which is another $120 to your purchase, is great. It's one of the best writing and drawing experiences. There is almost no delay to the naked eye, but even on the iPad Air, I thought it was great too, and almost no delay. If you're into graphic design, then the iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil should be on the top of your list. The Magic Keyboard is a slightly different story. The typing experience is great, even though it's a little bit expensive, but it's a little bit top heavy because of the iPad when you're using it on your lap. Snapping on the iPad is really easy, and honestly, it's super secure, but don't get it in white because honestly, it looked amazing when I got it out of the box, but it gets very dirty very easily. The keys themselves are backlit and automatically turn on when it starts getting dark, which is a nice feature because it's one less thing that I have to think about. A small annoyance is that I have to go into the settings, then go into general, then go into keyboard, then go into hardware keyboard just to adjust the keyboard brightness. This is a little bit annoying. Also, there is no function row keys, which I find a little bit frustrating as I do use them a lot on my Macs, but I do understand that there might not be a lot of room for it. Adjusting the position of the screen is really easy and it gives me plenty of movement, but using the Apple Pencil with the Magic Keyboard isn't sort of the most comfortable, as your wrist is kind of at a weird angle. Having the extra USB-C port on the Magic Keyboard is the biggest thing for me, because if your dock doesn't support charging, then being able to use the Thunderbolt port and being able to charge at the same time is just great. But that's enough of the accessories, because I have a few problems with this iPad here, and before you go rage into the comments, please hear me out. Apple marketed this thing as a computer killer with its dumb advert, but in its current state, I just don't understand how most pros are going to stop using a quote-unquote computer. The battery life is great for an iPad with 8 to 10 hours of light use, but then when you try to edit with this machine and do some heavier tasks, it does drop down to between 4 to 6 hours, which for a normal iPad is good. But coming from the new M1 MacBooks, this just felt bad. The MacBooks get nearly double the amount of battery life to the iPad Pro in the exact same task. For a portable machine, this is important to me because it's basically the same size as M1 MacBook, and this thing gets me double the amount of battery life. And this thing is actually even lighter because with this and the Magic Keyboard, it's actually heavier than an M1 MacBook Air. Even the MacBook Air was hard to leave home because it was lighter and more capable than the iPad Pro, even though my M1 MacBook Air is actually the base model. So that USB-C port on the iPad Pro, yes, it supports Thunderbolt, but there's only one. Look at every M1 Mac review out there. Almost every professional user is waiting for Apple to bring out a model with more ports because, you guessed it, they use a ton of ports. Yes, you can buy a Thunderbolt dock for it, but you could say the same about the M1 MacBooks or even the base model iMacs. and that leaves you with a full speed Thunderbolt port to play with. The other issue is the fact that you can't format external drives, nor can you even eject drives, which is a problem because it can cause corruption issues, which for a pro is a huge no. There are also a lot of quirks with iPadOS, like it's still clunky file management system, but they did add a progress bar for file transfers in iPadOS 15. I guess that's good, right? Anyway, the thing is that apps like Google Docs and more aren't as good as their web counterparts and also their Mac counterparts. I also found that iPad versions of all the apps that I use aren't as fleshed out as the Mac or web versions. Now, this isn't just Apple's fault here, and part of the blame falls on the developers, but why would the developers put all their functions into an iPad app when most pros are using a Mac? And this leads me on to the main issue. I don't have an issue with the blooming screen, the placement of the camera, or even the single Thunderbolt port. It's iPadOS. I have to review the product as a whole right now, and if you haven't used iPadOS in a professional setting, then you know its limitation. Yes, you can edit photos and videos like a pro. Yes, you can create amazing artwork in Procreate, which I think this is designed for, and you can edit podcasts with Audition, but try using it as your only computer and you'll be craving for a Mac. Firstly, if you're into podcasting, you're going to struggle to grow with this machine, as any attached audio interface and trying to split out the audio just doesn't seem possible or is just really clunky to do so. You also can't use multiple applications to tap into the audio like you can on a Mac. Then it comes to video editing, and even though LumaFusion is great and they're constantly updating it with new features, I just can't use it for paid work. Firstly, there are many features missing from it that I use in Final Cut Pro, and even the features that it does have aren't as fleshed out. And if you guys know me, I love my plugins, and you can't use them with iPadOS. Also, have you guys watched my multi-screen experience on this iPad? It's not good, and you can't just dock it like a MacBook, which a lot of Apple users love to do. Apple just announced the new iPadOS, and it's basically just as useless as before, as harsh as that may sound, because even the multitasking features aren't that much better than the previous version. Yeah, it might be easier to use, but it's not better. Okay, so I want you guys to think about something here. The M1 chip can thermal throttle, like on the M1 MacBook Air. So if we see ProApps coming to the iPad Pro, then in its shell, it's going to thermal throttle if Apple allows it to be pushed. If the iMac with 2 fans, bringing the best performance for ProApps, can still spin up its fans, what do you think the iPad Pro will be like under the same conditions? It would have to be a watered down version of the ProApp, or you would notice a considerable drop in performance. The reason we don't see the iPad throttle in its current state is because few apps actually make it do that. If you are looking at something as your main machine, why wouldn't you just get a MacBook with its ability to run almost anything that you want, which pros need, as we like to customize our tools for our workflow, not change our workflow to adapt to our tools. Yes, you miss out on the ProMotion display and the Apple Pencil and the mini LED display as well, but there are only very few people that will actually need this, like for example people who use Procreate. And if you are someone who is using Procreate as their professional application, then you already know that the iPad Pro is going to be a good buy for you. But for anyone else, this just doesn't make sense. With the new iPadOS 15, they also brought Swift programming to the iPad, so you can code iPad and iPhone apps. But when I asked developers, what would you rather give a developer, an iPad or a MacBook? Again, for the money, if you want to get into coding, especially if you are a student, grab a Mac, because you can code whatever you like. And that's the main headline of this review in my opinion. If you are a pro that doesn't do artwork, then don't get the iPad Pro as your main machine, especially a spec'd out one. You have to be willing to adapt, change and accept its shortcomings, because despite the potential of the M1 chip in the iPad Pro, you are not going to get everything you need software wise, not anytime soon anyway. With the new M1X MacBook Pro 14-inch rumoured to have mini LED, a faster chip and fans for sustained heavy workloads, amazing battery life and all the ports you could want. Once you spec out an iPad Pro with all of its accessories, you're going to questioning yourself, why did you spend over $2,000 on an iPad Pro when that MacBook would be a much better option without any of the accessories? The M1 iPad Pro is a companion device, not the main show. Oh, and if you plan on using this as sidecar to edit HDR content, well, you can't, because the screen will be an SDR, another huge miss by Apple here. If you need a computer right now that you can grow with, or you are a professional, then just get yourself a MacBook Pro with 16GB of unified memory and you are golden. By the time you spec out an iPad Pro with a keyboard and a Thunderbolt dock and all the other bits and bobs, it's going to become less portable and more expensive. Plus, you lose out on that fantastic battery life, which if you are on the move, could be a lifesaver. If you can wait, then I would suggest waiting for the Mini LED MacBook, as I think that would be an iPad Pro killer. But there we have it. As always, this is a discussion. Please leave a comment down below whether you agree or disagree, and please be kind down there. I know I've been a little bit harsh in this review. Also, check out the links down in the description to support the channel. If you haven't already, please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at TechCarMoon. Hit that like button if you've enjoyed it, and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. But if you want to see more from me right now, you guys know what to do. There are 2 videos right over here. Go ahead, click on them. You'll enjoy them. I know you will. Anyway, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.